Welcome into the podcast this morning. Thank you for making this podcast a part of your day. This podcast is 100% honest, 100% of the time. So thank you for going on this podcasting journey with me. And if you have not yet, hit that subscribe button right down there. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please follow this podcast wherever you're listening to this podcast. All right, we've got a loaded show today. The Minnesota Vikings-Los Angeles Rams game officially got moved to Arizona, and it was the obvious decision following the Los Angeles Wildfires. There was no other decision that could be made. The Lakers canceled their game against the Charlotte Hornets, I believe, and they're an inside stadium. They play at Crypto Arena, formerly Staples Center, and air quality isn't really affected in a stadium like that. And they canceled their game. The air quality is terrible right now in Los Angeles. And unfortunately, for really all parties, even the Minnesota Vikings, this game got shifted over to Arizona. And the reason why I say all parties is because this is an unfortunate situation. It's a sad situation. And we prayed for the families, the city of Los Angeles yesterday, and we just lifted them up to Jesus, and we just pray that miracles would happen during this time. And it's a football game. It's an important football game. It's a football game that's going to change lives because either Sam Darnold makes a ton of money this offseason or he makes a bunch of money this offseason. And it's a football game that changes the course of careers and all those things. But the Los Angeles Rams are now essentially playing a road game. It's a neutral site game between the Vikings and the Rams. But at this point in time, there's probably going to be just as much Minnesota Vikings fans in attendance at this football game than LA Rams fans. And they got to travel. They got to stay in their hotel. They can't live in their own house. And it's one of those things now where you've got to think about this from the LA Rams perspective. Of course, the coaches are going to spin it. Do it for your city. Do it for the LA. Do it for whatever. Do it for those people back home that can't make this game. Do it for those people back home whose house burnt down. Do it for the people back home that need hope and inspiration during a time of challenges, during a time of difficulty. So that's going to be the way things are phrased from the Rams' perspective, from the coaching perspective. But from the players' perspective, these guys are going through the exact same thing that some of these other families are going through. The LA Rams had to cancel practice or meetings at the end of practice last week because fires started in the west side of LA, and that's where a lot of Rams players lived. So they needed to get home and address certain things with their family, make sure they were safe, make sure that they're in a good situation. So, they want to do it for their city. They want to do it for their fans. But at the same time, they're going to be just as distracted because their own families are going through the situation. So you've got a blend. You got a mix of things happening within the Los Angeles Rams team right now because you want to play for the city, but yet you might be distracted because your own family is going through the exact same thing right now. And it's really an unfortunate advantage for the Minnesota Vikings. You don't want an advantage like this. This doesn't feel good. The line moved from Minnesota Vikings -1 to Minnesota Vikings 2.5 favorites versus the Los Angeles Rams because this game moved to a neutral site field in Arizona. And it's not fun. That doesn't feel good. As a fan, I'm not rooting for this. So, advantage Minnesota Vikings, I guess. But it obviously is going to make a difference at the end of this game. Something that's I talked about a little bit earlier in this podcast already is the course of this game could change careers. Darnold could go from making tons of money to making a bunch of money, or could continue his trajectory of making a ton of money this offseason. Regardless, Darnold is going to get paid. 35 touchdowns, 12 picks this season. There will be a team out there that pays him a bunch of money. Now, is it a ton of money? That will depend on how he performs in the playoffs. And Sam Darnold made a quote recently where he talked about that, essentially. This is what he said. It's kind of where legacies, I guess, are made, Darnold said via Andrew Kramer of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Not just winning games, but winning those later games like AFC, NFC championships, winning Super Bowls. That's how you're going to get remembered. And it's true. You are remembered for how you perform in the playoffs. One of the worst Super Bowl winning starting quarterbacks I remember, because he won a Super Bowl off the heels of the Baltimore Ravens 2001 defense. Trent Dilfer. I don't remember Trent Dilfer because he was a great quarterback. I remember Trent Dilfer because he won a Super Bowl as the Baltimore Ravens QB1. And that is how he's remembered. He's remembered for being carried to a Super Bowl from the Baltimore Ravens defense. And he has a Super Bowl ring. Sam Darnold is going to be remembered from Minnesota Vikings perspective, from a Minnesota Vikings perspective, based on how he performs in the playoffs this season and later if he signs a contract extension with the Minnesota Vikings. But in reality, we're looking at like a $30 to $40 million game for Sam Darnold against the Rams. If he performs well and puts up 3 touchdowns, 0 picks, and the Minnesota Vikings win, Darnold is going to get paid big time by a Raiders, by a Giants, by some offseason team that's thirsty for a quarterback. And Darnold's thirsty for a big paycheck. If he doesn't perform well, if he goes out there, throws 1 touchdown, 2 or 3 picks, well, that number is going to go down. That number is going to go down $20 to $30 million. You know, there's still going to be a team that's thirsty enough for a quarterback to pay Darnold, whether that be the Vikings bringing him back for a year as J.J. McCarthy gets ready to be QB1, or the Giants and Raiders still paying him a bunch of money. But that number is going to change dramatically if Darnold performs poorly against the Rams this weekend. And there's a lot of pressure on Sam Darnold. Imagine yourself. Imagine you had one work day and you're at your job doing your normal work schedule, but based on this one performance of a day, your paycheck could change $30 to $40 million. Imagine that. Imagine one day where you're working your normal schedule, and if something goes wrong, you just lost $30 million. If you perform really well, you just capitalized on the bank. And that's a lot of pressure. That's a big deal for Sam Darnold this Monday night. And Kyle Brandt is a host on Good Morning Football, the television show. I take that and make it into a podcast for iHeartRadio. And he's an opinionist. Peter Schrager's more of the insider opinionist. I'm more of an opinionist. I'm not an insider, but I'm an opinionist from the Minnesota Vikings perspective, meaning I can tell you kind of the conversations that are happening within the Minnesota Vikings organization because I have common sense and I try to think like how they think. And, you know, from the Vikings perspective, it was a 1-year rental for Sam Darnold until he completely changed that perspective because of the ways he performed this season. 35 touchdowns, 12 picks. And then in week 18 against the Detroit Lions, the Vikings' perspective changed again on Darnold. It's like, okay, now we kind of got to wait and see. That's kind of a wait and see now. Darnold went from down here. He went to up here. It's like, oh, we got to bring this guy back. And now he's kind of like, okay, let's see what he does against the Rams. That's how the Vikings are viewing Sam Darnold right now, in my objective opinion. And Kyle Brandt had this to say about Sam Darnold's future with the Minnesota Vikings just the other day.
It's not unfair to talk that Sam Darnold has had a really hard time in this league up until this year and had a really hard time in Detroit. If he comes out in this game and he throws an early pick or there's a missed throw to Justin Jefferson, those 6 years come out. Those 6 years don't get to go away. You don't just make them all go away. I think he has a lot to prove. I think if he plays poorly in this game, if he loses, I don't think he's the Vikings starting quarterback next year, in my opinion. And maybe that's a rash decision. Maybe it's not. What does he have to play for? Never mind the win. He has to play for the rest of his career here. These are big, big-time stakes with Sam Darnold against the Rams.
It's true. This guy is playing for $30 to $40 million in this one football game. If he can win a playoff game, he can go to the agent, and the agent can go to these teams. Oh, he's a playoff winner. In his first season with the Minnesota Vikings, he took them to the divisional round in the playoffs. These are all things that can change based on how Sam Darnold plays and how the Minnesota Vikings perform in this football game. And a large part of that performance is going to be how the Los Angeles Rams team reacts or performs or how motivated they are for the Los Angeles community because of the wildfires. And that's an unknown right now. So it's really a stressful and hectic environment right now for Sam Darnold because his career largely depends on this football game and how much money he's going to get, how much security he gets, how he can pitch teams this offseason that are looking for a starting quarterback, including potentially the Minnesota Vikings. Like, we're looking at, okay, if he loses this game, maybe we're looking at like a 2 to 3 year deal, $70 to $80 million. If he wins this football game and plays well, we're looking at 3-year deal, $110 million. That's how important this game is for Sam Darnold. And there's a lot of pressure in that. Just imagine working one day for a shift of $40 million. The pressure that would have on you and the stress. Whew. Imagine doing a podcast, and based on one podcast that I did, I got $40 million extra dollars. Wow. That sounds tough. All right. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making this podcast a part of your day and for going on this podcasting journey with me. I appreciate you all, and thank you for listening and watching.